everyone, and welcome. Just as a reminder before we get started to silence your phones so that we don't have any disruptions. But I am very excited and so glad that Dr. Finch agreed to do a presentation for us and on his knowledge and his invention of the barbecue roll, as it's called, for Apollo 11, and being a John Knox Village resident, that makes it even better. So please welcome Dr. Harold Finch.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and I want to greet America's greatest generation. Turn to your neighbor and say, "You're the greatest." Many of you know my wife, my amazing wife of 64 years. Peggy, she's always stood behind me on everything and supported me when everyone said what you're doing is crazy. But she stuck with me, and I couldn't do anything without her. And my daughter, Susan, her daughter is Sophia, one of our sons, Mark. How many of you remember what you were doing on July 20th, 1969? Most of you, let me give you a hint if you don't remember. That paper cost 10 cents 50 years ago. Well, your eyes were undoubtedly riveted to a black and white Motorola TV on that day, right? Okay. Well, you remember because many historians believe that the moon landing was the greatest achievement of mankind up to that time. And so I want to give you a challenge. In the next 10 days, before July 20th, if you are able to communicate with your grandchildren, your nieces, great-nephews, and so forth, share with them the excitement that only you participated in, and let them know something about our real history. In the next 35 minutes or so, I want to provide some fun information. We're not going to be very technical, that you can share with your family. And I want to also provide some insights into the magnitude and scope of the moon landing. And then I'd like to explain my role and how a chicken helped solve one of NASA's biggest problems. And at the end, if you have questions, we'll be able to take some of them. In 1960, President Kennedy told America we were going to land a man on the moon in this decade. Immediately, the skeptics said, "You can't do that. It's impossible. We don't have the telemetry. We don't have the computer memorization. We don't have anything, the rocketry." Those skeptics greatly underestimated the American can-do spirit, right? This is a little model of the Saturn rocket and the Apollo at the very top that was launched for all of the 9 moon trips. This is huge. Are you familiar with the World War I monument? Well, this is 50% taller than that. And it weighed 6.5 million pounds at launch. Now, if you're talking to your young grandchildren, like mine, 6.5 million pounds doesn't mean anything. Their eyes just glaze over. So put it into something they might understand. They all know what a big thing is. The elephant weighs about 4 tons. Well, it would take 560 elephants to balance the scale of this. This is a 360-foot stick of dynamite. It's mostly fuel, very explosive, liquid oxygen. We called it LOX. And it's powerful to lift that weight. At the very top of that is the Apollo. The cone is the command module where the 3 astronauts for Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, sat in the pilot seats. And then the lower part is the service module, and this contains the fuel for the rocket, oxygen, electrical components, and the Lunar Excursion module, the Eagle, that landed on the moon. It's tucked away inside here. Now, your grandchildren may say, why did they fire it from Cape Canaveral? Why not the Midwest? Why not California? Well, you couldn't do it in the Midwest because if they had to abort the flight, you didn't want it crashing into populated areas, so it had to go out over an ocean. So why not California? Well, the Earth is turning about 1,000 miles an hour right now as you're sitting there, so fasten your seatbelts. By shooting it to the east, which is the way the Earth is turning, we get that extra boost, and that meant the rocket didn't have to be quite as big. If we shot it to the west, it would probably be this tall. The Saturn was a real gas guzzler. The average Lee Summit driver uses 4,500 gallons of fuel in 6 to 8 years. 6 to 8 years. The Saturn used that much fuel in 1 second. So the first stop was Earth orbit. I need a volunteer. I won't embarrass it. All right, come on up. What's your name?
I'm Peter.
Peter, glad to have you here. What we're going to do is launch one of Peanut's characters, Woodstock, so you might grab it down here. Now, what I want you to do is twirl it around your head. Hang on tight.
I'll try not to hit myself.
Yeah.
Be ready now if it goes off.
All right, that's good. Now, did you feel like if you were to let go, it would fly out into the audience?
I did.
Okay,
I wouldn't mind that.
what is that called, that force? Centrifugal force. But we don't want it to fly out to space yet. And so, to be in orbit for the interim, we need a force to counter that centrifugal force, and that force is called gravity. And about 17,000 miles an hour, the gravity and centrifugal force are equal, and so it stays in orbit. But we don't want to stay in orbit, we want to go into space. And so now I want you to swing it around, and we're going to count down 3, 2, 1. You see that clock back there? That's the moon.
Okay.
So Peter, it's up to you. All right, start going. 3, 2, 1, go.
I'll let go this time.
That's why we didn't launch over Kansas City. There we go. 3, 2, 1. Oh! You didn't quite make it. I think you went to Pluto. Peter, thank you for your assistance. This is a LED flashlight.
Thank you. That's very good.
You can use that flashlight in the garage for our next tornado warning. Now, some of your teenage grandchildren are going to have some tough questions. One of them might be, we know the moon is about 240,000 miles from Earth, depending whether it's at the apogee or the perigee. And it's going to go 25,000 miles an hour to leave Earth, so that should take about 9.5 hours. Why did it take 3 days? Okay, I'm going to give you the answer. When it's going 25,000 miles an hour, it's parallel to the Earth. But the moon's up there. So we would have to turn it around, and it has zero velocity in this direction. To go to the moon at 25,000 miles an hour, you'd need a rocket probably 20 times bigger than this. So we take an alternate route called a parabolic path, because it's the shape of a parabola. And if your grandkids ask, what's a parabola? You can show them your knowledge. That's a parabola. And that's the path in which the astronauts took to escape Earth at 25,000 miles an hour. When the Apollo 11, with Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins, got near the moon, they initiated 4 events. First of all, they turned the Apollo. It's going in this direction. They turned it 180 degrees, fired the thruster, which is like putting on brakes real big, to slow it down for the moon's velocity, because the moon's gravity is like 1/6 of it is on Earth. And so you have to go much slower to counter the moon's gravity and to be in a lunar orbit. Secondly, Armstrong and Aldrin stayed in this part, and Collins moved to the back part. They then turned this cone 180 degrees, and they latched on to the lunar lander that was tucked away in here. And they pulled it out, and Collins was on his own, and the other 2 headed toward a landing on the moon. After exploring the moon, they then blasted off, leaving the lower part of the lunar excursion module with legs that landed, left that behind. The moon has several of those now. And they then rendezvoused back with Collins. And then finally, they accelerated to leave lunar orbit and take another parabolic path on their way back to Earth. So it's pretty simple, straightforward stuff. Easier said than done. I've been dreaming about space travel since I was in elementary school. But it took Sputnik for me to realize that it was now literally possible for my fantasies to become reality. I had just gotten out of graduate school, went to work at Midwest Research Institute here in Kansas City, And the United States at that time was in a heated race with Russia to land on the moon first. Plans for the lunar excursion, or the lunar Apollo spacecraft, were in the very preliminary stages. NASA was seeking bidders to develop technology to overcome the biggest challenge to space travel, and that's the extreme temperatures of space. So I need one more volunteer. Jane, come on up. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Dr.
For volunteering. Would you like to go to the moon?
Oh, sure.
You would?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you what you might expect. If you're standing on the moon and you're looking at the sun straight back there, you're not wearing a spacesuit, but you've got oxygen, the blood in the front of your body would boil instantly. And on the back side, facing away from the sun, your blood would freeze like ice instantly. So how does that sound?
Not good.
Okay. Well, all around the vehicle you'll see little clusters here. Do you know what they are?
No.
Rockets.
Okay, rockets.
Very good. Rockets. And there's 5 rockets in each of 4 clusters. And so that's several thruster clusters. Can you say that?
No.
Thruster cluster.
Clusters.
All right, good. If this rocket cluster right here were exposed to the sun for 5 hours, it would burn up. If it were shadowed from the sun, it would freeze up in 3.5 hours. And either way, they would not work, and you'd have a huge disaster. Thank you. So, I'll let you think about that. But in the meantime, I have the tornado warning for you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Give her a hand. Well, competition for NASA's Apollo heating program, they call it the AHP, was fierce. It was a plum project. Everyone wanted to be involved in the first voyage to the moon. Shirley, Boeing, or Martin, Douglas, Grumman, one of the big giants would get the project. I told my boss, I'd like to send a proposal to NASA. Guess what he did? He laughed out loud. I was in my 20s. He says, you have no experience. He says, you don't have the knowledge. He was a great motivator of young men. He said, in the eyes of NASA, you're a nobody. And then he said my 4 favorite words. You can't do that. I had to prove him wrong. All I had to do was find a way to get a competitive edge and level the playing field with the big giants. That's easier said than done. I needed humongous help, but I knew one who could do that. As a Christian, I invited that one person, Jesus Christ, to join me in a one-day retreat and just hear from God. What can you tell me? You are all omniscient, omnipotent. You can help me. That is hard work. That's why most people never spend a day just thinking about the future, planning the future. By noon, my brain was about to fry. So I just took a break, went to a barbecue restaurant on the plaza, and just relaxed. But then my eyes fell on the window where they had a chicken and a pig on rotisseries. And I had an aha moment. I said, my gosh, these chefs know more about heat protection and smoothing heat and cold than a lot of the scientists. I didn't finish my lunch. I rushed back. I told my boss, I've got the solution here. It's going to be called the barbecue roll. He said, Harold, you are crazy. NASA's not going to spin a lunar spaceship like a chicken or a pig. Well, the rest is history, and if we could see the clip here from Apollo 13.
I apologize for any technical difficulty I may cause here.
Okay, Houston, we have land extraction. So we copy that 13. Now you're up for all more hot. I gotta get out of this suit.
Houston, we are ready for the getting the BTC, and I think once we're in that barbecue roll, Jack and I will eat.
The barbecue roll developed in Kansas City. Touch of irony that my boss ended up working for me. But even though our work was on schedule, on budget, I still had some sleepless nights occasionally. I knew there had to be some hidden traps out there, and if we didn't find them, we could have a disaster because this was going to be running in real time. And so spent a lot of time searching for these unknown hidden traps. One of them would be if the Apollo went precisely over the North Pole or the South Pole of Earth, the Moon, Saturn, any place over the pole precisely, it would be like 1 divided by 0. If you know anything about mathematics, you know that can't be done. Some people say, well, it's infinity, but infinity times 0 does not equal 1. I don't know what it equals, but the computer doesn't either, and it would just spin there, and the whole thing would be a failure. So what we did was, if it were to ever go over the pole precisely, even though if it was a 1 in a million, we put in a little fudge factor and told it, you're not quite over. We altered the course just a wee bit, and then the mathematics, the computer could solve that problem. Another danger, potential danger, was strange shadows in space. So we built a 1/10 scale model in the laboratory at Midwest Research. So that's 360 feet. This was 36 feet long, so it's a pretty big model. And had a searchlight that we shine on the model. NASA identified 950 locations on the Apollo that they were very concerned about temperature-wise. We hired a KU intern who's studying astronomy to work that summer. And his job was to record every one of those 950 locations, whether it was in the shadow or not. Yes, no, 950 times. And then he rotated it 1 degree and did it again. Did that 360 times. And then did it for several different configurations. All in all, he recorded yes or no over 1 million times during the summer. Poor guy. I think he probably changed his major to literature when he went back. Creating the Apollo heating program really made me nervous at times because of its complexity. is mind-boggling for my little brain. I can't really explain it, but I'll try to demonstrate. Here, I'll just take one. Thank you. Okay, so let's say I'm the Apollo. And here's a spot, one of the 950 spots they want to know about. And we're circling the moon over there. Over there is the sun. It's shining on this spot. But it depends on that angle. And at sunset, it's much cooler, isn't it? Because the angle from the sun to you is much less. So we had to know that angle. But we also were getting heat from the moon, most of it called albedo, reflected heat from the sun. And it was hitting at a different angle. So that was fed into the mathematical formulas, and then it moved a second. The angle from the sun changed, the angle from the moon changed, and meantime we were doing the barbecue roll. So all those angles were constantly changing in several different dimensions. I don't know if you can understand that at all, but my brain can't handle that. But fortunately, the formulas of science don't get worried about things like that. And they worked perfectly. And the mathematics worked perfectly, especially Bessel functions. And all of that just worked wonderfully, whether I understood it or not. And praise the Lord, the Apollo heating program performed flawlessly. I got a handwritten note from astronaut Jim Irwin on Apollo 15. He was the first one to drive a buggy on the moon. But his note was very short, but being handwritten, it meant so much to me. He said, "Harold, thank you for your work. You kept us comfortable." But the bottom line is that the Apollo heating program enabled Houston's mission control to protect the Apollo from killer temperature extremes on all 9 of the manned lunar missions. Obviously, I've just touched the surface, but now let's fast forward 40 years. On the 40th anniversary of the moon landing, I received a challenge from YWAM headquarters, and they said, "You need to make a movie to tell this story for those that follow." They convinced me to do it, but I knew nothing about movie making. So I got a book called Moviemaking for Dummies. I couldn't get through the first chapter because these dummies apparently were very smart dummies. But I had to contact one of the producers for Spider-Man. I said, "I've got a script written by a best-selling author. Would you look at it?" He said he would, and he did, and he got back with me. He said, "It's a very good script." Ooh, wow. But then he said, "The odds of that script being made into a movie are 1 in 500. And he said, "If you did do that, the odds of that movie being made in a theatrical release are 1 in 1,000. So I did the math, and that meant the odds are about 1.5 million against me. And then he went on to say, "You don't have any experience. Frankly, you're too old." And then he said those 4 words, "You can't do that." Well, Spider-Man got caught in his own web. Unlimited hit the theaters in 2013. Hollywood tracks every movie by dollar bills. Does that surprise you? That's not the way I track it, but they tracked this movie along with 113 others that came out on our opening weekend, and they ranked ours third out of 113. It's loosely based on my life, on the Apollo, on orphan ministry, but it was fictionalized for some fun and some adventure. You all know Fred Thompson? The young people don't know him, but he made a lot of movies, and probably Red October was the best known movie. And then he played in Law and Order as a DA up until a few years before he died. Everyone said he's the guy you got to have to play you in the movie. I knew what his fee was, and it was way out of our budget. But we sent the script to the agent and said, see if you can just get him to look at it. And Fred himself called and said, I love the script, it's perfect for me. He said, I'll do it for whatever you can afford to pay me. So it was a very generous gift. The setting is a Mexican orphanage. The hero is a brilliant MIT student with a crazy idea that you can't do that, how to supply free electricity to third world countries. The villain is a drug cartel out to steal that invention. The genre is suspense, faith, children, action, and some romance. Today you can view the movie on PureFlix, Christian Cinema, Amazon Prime. And if you're in Europe, Africa, or Australia, it's playing now. But the best news is Melissa McKay has arranged to show Unlimited next month in our theater. So the schedule will come out in The Voice in 2 weeks. Would you like to see a trailer?
Yes.
Out there waiting for this thing.
The project is dead.
Silence, this student is not dead. It's very much alive.
So where are we?
Well, I assume that you know you're in Mexico.
Not orphanage. With the pleasure do I have? Pleasure of San Rolo.
Let's just call him helpful scientist.
You're still here if you want.
You arrive under violent circumstances. With no story and no past.
So you don't trust me?
No, I trust you.
I like you too.
I said trust, not like.
What do you want to be when you grow up, buddy?
Most people look at these kids and always see future drug dealers and thieves.
Know that you can do whatever you want to do. Go wherever you want to go. Some peanuts or something.
Power's out.
This device will provide free energy to the most remote villages.
So then that must be your goal. Bringing light to us impoverished people.
We can rebuild it.
Because that's impossible.
With God, anything's possible.
We can open orphanages anywhere.
Look, there's something we're not being told. Something we want to be dead. Something we want my advice. This is all connected.
Who knows what kind of business he's wrapped up in?
We found some stuff and we did a background check on his passport. Yeah, he's dirty, this guy.
Just say the truth once.
You put this whole orphanage at risk.
Dale, you have to trust me, okay?
Harold, what are you doing?
I just want you to know that I'm here for you. I don't care what you've done.
You really want me to read that book, don't you?
God has a wonderful plan for each of us.
Never quit, dude. Get God's attention. It's any a miracle. You can make history. Got it working again?
This is what's possible.
I can't believe it. This is amazing.
That's a goal in life.
Well, I hope you'll be able to watch Unlimited, and I especially hope this little briefing on the Apollo has resurrected some proud moments from your past of the amazing historic achievement pulled off by the USA, the greatest country on the planet. I am so thankful to God that and humbled that NASA selected an ordinary, simple Kansas City guy who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks in Wyandotte County in his 20s to play a small part in this historic moon landing. You've been a really great audience, and I just want to thank you very much. If you have a question or two, I'd be happy to try to answer it.
How did you get the barbecue roll to them? In a letter or?
Well, my boss said I couldn't do it, so I did what he wanted me to do. But on the weekends and evenings, I was working on the research, and I sent Apollo or NASA Houston a proposal, and they apparently liked it a lot more than my boss. And
because we hadn't been to space before, how did we know about all of these temperature things and
well, actually, space is a perfect laboratory. There is not things out there like air that really makes the heat transfer very much more complicated. So it's pure physics and pure mathematics. It's the best place to do research is in space. That's why we have the laboratory up there now.
Public television has got a series this week. It had on Monday and Tuesday was a 2-hour program all about NASA, about the very beginning of the NASA history. And tonight they continue part 3 at 8 o'clock from 8 to 10, and then I think they're continuing from 10 to 12.
What channel?
Public television.
Okay.
Channel 19 on some TVs it would be 111.2. That would give you public television channel number 1.
Okay, I think we all have access to that, and so 8 o'clock tonight. There's a lot out there now. It's the 50th anniversary in 1 week.
Since the computer generation has resulted today into being so complex and so capable, how in the world did you deal with all of the mathematics and all the physics without the supercomputers?
Well, we had computers then. They were just huge. The IBM 7090 that I worked on was like 6 blocks long. But it was powerful. It could now be reduced, I don't know if into an iPhone or not, but greatly reduced. Yes?
I did see something this morning on, I think, one of the business channels, CNBC or something. They had a little iPhone, they were talking, I think, about the spacecraft, but they said this computer and this little phone is like 20 times or 200 times more powerful than the computers that they used back then.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can I ask another question? I remember my dad telling me that you had worked on the rotation, but did you also work on the heat shields, or did you work together?
No, I did not work on the re-entry. That's a total different animal. I only worked in space.
Okay.
Yes.
What progress do you see in our making it to the Mars in the next decade?
In the next 5 years, there's going to be, well, in the last 100 years, 7 civilians have gone into space. In the next 5 years, there will be, I think, multiple hundreds. 5 companies, including Boeing and Elon Musk and 3 others, have 7 vehicles that are in the manufacturing stage. Some are designed strictly for tourists. Some are where you can piggyback with astronauts, but you can buy a ticket for the cheapest one, which is the Voyager, that is not a rocket. It hangs from a high-altitude space balloon at orbital height, 100,000 feet or so, and 8 tourists are hanging from that in a capsule, and they do not orbit, but they see the curvature of the Earth and the views that someone in a capsule orbiting the Earth would see, and then it makes a soft landing. They're now taking reservations for that flight, and it's $75,000. If you have a little more cash available, the SpaceX Dragon, Crew Dragon, will ride with astronauts to the space station, where they will be able to stay in a luxury hotel in space for 10 days and then return. And right now, the first flight is scheduled for 2021, and the cost is $55 million per person. Popular Mechanics has had a couple editions. I think this was May and April and May, that really, if you can pick it up in the library or something, share with your grandchildren, because they can go into space.
I thought I saw on TV that we're headed for the sun now.
The sun?
The sun.
I don't think so.
It's going to take years to get there, but I thought, is this fiction or is this for real? I don't know.
Yeah, you don't want to go to the sun. No.
But is that a possibility?
Well, you can go there, but you'll be incinerated the last 10 million miles.
Did anybody else see that on TV?
Pardon?
This past week. I just saw this past week on TV.
Yeah, I don't know, but I would not take that flight.
Considering entrepreneurs going into space now, how long do you think it'll be before someone retrieves the lunar lander and brings it back to sell at auction?
Well, it obviously can be done now. It all boils down to budget, you know. And that's why the private industry is getting involved, is they can do things to help the government and sometimes do it better. Okay. Yes.
How much concern is there, NASA, for instance, concerning space junk and its hazardous position?
I didn't put my hearing aids in because it distorts my voice. Did you hear the question?
Space junk.
What's the concern with NASA and space junk?
Oh. Well, space is awfully big, but there is junk out there, and that's one of the challenges, is to be able to identify it before it is a collision. But the odds are very, very small, but it can still happen. We'll take one more question, and then we'll stick around a few minutes if you'd like.
Do you know anything about Apollo 8 and when the capsule, when it was still on the pad, there was a fire in there?
Yeah.
3 astronauts. Did they ever determine the cause of that fire?
Well, the question is, on Apollo 8, it was still in the testing stages, caught on fire with, I believe, 3 astronauts in it. And the problem was they were sealed and they had no way to get out. So that's one thing they learned from that, is the escape mechanism. Okay, well, thank you. You've been really great. Appreciate it.